Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am DK Bhattacharya and we will be talking about definition, aims and objectives of anthropology. We have been as a species very inquisitive about the origin of the planet and also origin of mankind. And as early as 2nd century BC, a Chinese historian by the name of Sima Qian has thought of 4 stages of human development. The first stage, he said, was a Stone Age, and the second as a Jade Age, and the third as Bronze Age, and the fourth, of course, the Iron Age or modern history. Nobody knew that he came so close to the reality at that time, but then he was not accepted, and nobody even repeated that fourfold development of human culture after Su Qian. Dr. John Lightfoot from 1654 gave a biblical concept of human origin and the origin of the planet. And the origin of the planet, according to him, was 4004 BC on 23rd October at the civilized time of 9 a.m. This shows that the believer of the Bible and spread of Christianity always stopped a scientific investigation for the origin of the planet and of course of man. They have been always trying to stick to the chapter of Genesis of the Bible, which talks about man having been created by God in 7 days. And not only that, any scientific investigation to find out knowledge beyond the Bible was labeled as heretic, and there was punishment given to them. So man did not go beyond this Bible chapter of Genesis. But it was in Suffolk in 1754 that an excavation was being done for erection of a church when large number of bones and tools were found. And that's the first time people started accepting, with of course some reservation, that man existed beyond the biblical period of the prescribed by the chapter of Genesis. They used to refer to this period as antediluvian period. Antediluvian because they say the Joan of Arc was the diluvian period, and it was before the diluvian period that man existed. This kind of a ding-dong philosophical approach to identifying the origin of the planet and origin of man went on for about 200 years. It was later on when geology as a subject developed and the chance excavation and chance discovery of bones that started man looking at differently his history. For instance, the Neanderthals were discovered from Dusseldorf, and for the first time it was seen as a very primitive kind of a man. But Professor Verschow from Switzerland said that no, this is a man, modern man, with some biological pathological development. So they couldn't go beyond the limits set by the Bible for a long time. But then consistently after that, Australopithecus was discovered from Indonesia, and skeletons started coming up. With skeletons, a lot of stone tools started coming up. So man reluctantly started accepting this scientific definition of human culture and human beings and its origin beyond the Diluvian period. One of the first development of accepting human culture beyond a period of the chapter of Genesis was done by a man called Thomson. Thomson was an antiquity collector. He was not an archaeologist, and in Denmark. And he collected a lot of antiquities and started arranging them in his shop with some kind of labeling given to them. And he gave the label Old Stone Age or Paleolithicum and New Stone Age or Neolithicum for 2 sets of stone tools. Now this inadvertently, without knowing, he had already created a calibration of human cultural history. A calibration of human cultural history without touching chronology. The moment you touch chronology, you contradict the Bible. So without touching chronology, he said this is the older cultural period, this is the younger cultural period, and the antiquities are the stone tools that was developed by man, and man used them as his only weapon of survival. Now this development continued for a long time, until about a time we developed a very detailed chronological table called geochronology of the past of the planet. So it was found out when the geochronology came up, it was found out that a period called Pleistocene began from 2.8 million years ago and continued up to 10,000 BCE. And the tools that came from within the Pleistocene was the ones that were attributed by Thomson's term as Paleolithicum. So Paleolithicum therefore had shown a huge duration of its stay in the entire period of human cultural and biological evolution. The cultural evolution we have put under one word and call it Paleolithicum. The biological evolution, of course, we have found as having several stages. These stages were later on given genus and species specific terms as Homo habilis, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and so on and so forth. Many of them were put in the branches of trees, one having some relationship with the other, and clades, C-L-A-D-E, clades were supposed or proposed that these are closer to each other, belonging to the same species, yet they were not subspecies, and so on and so forth. So a very complex tree of evolution was evolved. And this complex tree of evolution talked about the development of the biological apparatus of man from the time he evolved from his ancestry of the apes. Now, these biological developments were done on measurable units, and these measurable units were called taxons. A taxon is a biological phenomena or a morphological feature which differentiates one species from the other, or one subspecies from another subspecies. These taxons were very meticulously defined morphological attributes, and they could be used as attributes of analysis. Parallel to this development, archaeologists who started getting oodles and oodles of tools, hundreds and thousands of tools. These tools had to be analyzed. They don't speak, they're dumb witness of the past. And these tools, one of the gentlemen called Boucher de Perth, he collected so many tools from Somme Valley. And he was a ship clerk, and in the Somme River, ships used to ply. And whenever a ship will stop at a place for loading and unloading, he had a lot of time, and he used to go around the bank of the river and collect the tools. He drew the tools and made 4 volumes with his own money. He published them, but they were not accepted. The intellectuals from France rejected them, and they said, no, man could not have made tools because man was made only in 7 days by God. So these contradictions made a great problem for pure scientific approach to the understanding of human culture and human biology. However, after it was more or less reluctantly accepted that yes, man was evolved in Pleistocene period, and we have now date for those Pleistocene period. It is 2.2 million years when we the first time developed Homo habilis. Homo is the first of our genus, and then 1.8 million years is the evolution of Homo erectus. So we have now dates, we have now taxonomic markers for each of the stages of development of man of the past. And it has reluctantly been accepted as heretic or otherwise. These scientists have been parallelly working. But the archaeologists, they collected these oodles of tools. I told about Boucher de Perth's collection, 4 volumes in his drawings. And these collections, they started creating attributes which are parallel to taxons, in biology. And these attributes were technomorphological attributes. If they find a tool in which a specific technique of manufacture is used, they give it a label of a taxon. So you have what you call a stone hammer technique, a cylinder hammer technique, a level war technique. So you have terms which are borrowed as parallel to development of the similar to taxons. One thing is very clear: the taxons is a biological process. It develops by intermarrying. Intermarrying can change taxons. Stone tools don't intermarry. So borrowing them was a little unethical, but we had no other alternative. The tools per se has no information for us. They are dumb past history product. They don't speak. So we try to create the tools and analyze the tools in terms of something which will be parallel to the taxons. Though we know taxons are biological entities which change by intermarriage, but tools don't intermarriage. So the taxons that we created for tools are technology and morphology. And on the basis of the technology and morphology, we have created types, and these types are called analytical types. You must be very clear about one point. Types have three attributes: morphology, technology, and function. The moment you have morphology, technology, and function, three things together, that type will be called cognitive type. A computer is a cognitive type. A shoe is a cognitive type. A shirt is a cognitive type. A shirt is something which is not eaten. A shirt is something you don't play football with. So the moment I say shirt, S-H-I-R-T, I mean the function. So the terms in which function is embedded is called cognitive type. We decided that we will not use cognitive type in the analysis or creating our taxons of tool types. Why? Because function of the tools we will never be able to reconstruct on empirical ground. The function of the tools, if we try to use cognitive type, we can someday say, sir, I have found a prehistoric computer. Now this is as ridiculous as saying that computer was known to people in prehistoric period. So obviously function is attributed, and you cannot attribute modern function to prehistory. So we decided, no, we will not use cognitive type. We will have to create what is called analytical types, where we will have technology, morphology, but no function. Function is the third attribute we will not use. So in technomorphological terms, we create what is known as taxons. I call them taxons, but no archaeologist will call them taxons. The archaeologist will call them as technomorphological markers, technomorphological attributes, technomorphological clusters. Now these technomorphological clusters are what is a type. A type is a technomorphological cluster. I must emphasize here about one thing. Activity and ethnicity needs to be differentiated. Activity can be one person, a mad person, making a tool in a particular way, but it still doesn't make it is a ethnicity. So what is ethnicity and what is activity? There is no doubt that to talk about ethnicity, you have to pass through activity. You cannot avoid activity because activity products are my antiquities. The raw material on which I am making my thesis are the products of activities, namely tools. So ethnicity and activity differentiation is done on the paramount definition of culture. Culture in a very, very crude definition will be one set of behavior, which is a group behavior. The behavior which is identically followed by one group. One. Two, it is extrasomatically inherited. That means the father works the same way, the child works the same way, the grandchild works the same way. So if there is a activity which can be proved as having a group identity, that means identically followed in a group, and if there is a activity which is found to be identically repeated through time, let us call that activity as type, as ethnicity. That activity immediately I talk as ethnicity. And in archaeology, I am trying to create ethnic characters, and in terms to develop these ethnic characters, I talk of assemblages. I talk of industries. I talk of traditions. Let us talk of assemblage. Assemblage is a cluster of antiquity. Antiquity is a product of behavior. I don't know whether the behavior is mere activity or behavior is ethnicity. I have to produce, my analysis has to prove that the behavior is a product of ethnicity and not just an activity. So when I find an antiquity, a group of antiquities, let us call tool types, and they are occurring in a cluster, this cluster will be called assemblage. Assemblage is a random cluster of large number of antiquities. It doesn't say anything about ethnicity except for the fact that I can say a group of human beings lived here, and made some tools, left the tools as it is. We do not know whether those groups of people had the possibility of repeating it in a generation-wise manner, because otherwise my definition of culture will not be there. So I have to prove two things, that they are a group behavior and also they are repeated in extrasomatic inheritance. A industry, suppose I have a river and the river runs for 20 kilometers, and the upper reaches of the river I have one assemblage, and the lower reaches of the river I have another assemblage. I've talked about assemblage already. So you have 4 or 5 assemblages. Then you can say, sir, they seem to be very similar. The people who are migrating, I will not use the word assemblage. I will take the name of the river and say this is an industry. So if the river is Ganga, let me call it Ganga industry. If the river is Narmada, let us call it Narmada industry. So I am trying to find out a large number of assemblages, group of people's activity spread over a large area, And then I come to ethnicity. In this industry, I find there are some which are showing progressive development. The upper reaches had particular kind of tools, let us say with 5 flake scars, and you go to the lower limits of the lower reaches of the river, and there you find the same tool with 25 scars. This is say there's a progression. There seems to be a progression of technique. Scars and techniques are my only way, my only approach to understanding ethnicity. I have no other taxons. So I go and find a progressive development within an industry. I say it is a tradition. I borrow the word tradition from sociology, and I say a tradition is a continuity of certain taxons through time. And as certain taxons go through time, I can give it an almost ethnicity name. Acheulean is an ethnicity name. Musterian is an ethnicity name. Aurignacian is an ethnicity name. So you create a plethora of names of ethnicity, the same way that you create Homo erectus, Homo sapien, Homo neanderthalensis, or even Homo habilis. You have a duality of a genus and a species. You don't create a duality here. You have your own taxons, and on the basis of taxons, you have created a parallel analytical model. Is it clear? The parallel analytical model, in the sense that if I am finding with the fossils large number of tools, then the fossils I have analyzed with taxons and giving it an evolutionary tree with interrelated branches and so on, creating different clades for each one of their evolutionary stages. I am attempting the same on the antiquity. So in archaeology, I developed archaeology from within biology or paleontology. It goes hand in hand because both are dependent on exploration of antiquities and exploration of past evidences of fossils. So this is a subject which developed from the womb, from the belly of paleontology. Paleontologists found it and they say, well, the chapter of Genesis does not explain it. Here we have a genus and here we have a species. Let us accept them as the beginning of the genus Homo and the first species of the genus Homo as Homo habilis. So we have created in archaeology terms which are based on something which is parallel to the taxons, and this something we call as technomorphology. Now in technomorphology also we find certain differences which is not capable of explaining the majority. I give you an example. There is a site called La Micoque which is in South France. Here you find a development of a late occurrence of an earlier period. The earlier period is called Acheulean, a late occurrence of Acheulean with its terrific morphological change. Now, this is a late surviving species, if I can borrow the biological term. It's a late surviving species of the archaic forms. Yet it has undergone some kind of change. Then we address the issue, why should a culture change? Can we say all cultures change in the same speed and all cultures change under the same imperatives? So archaeology has a very strong agenda with them. It's not only creating technomorphology and on the basis of that creating assemblage, industry and tradition, but also to explain what makes a culture change and what makes the speed of a culture change different at a site called A from a site called B. Now, this is something which is called interpretative archaeology. In the antiquities, you don't have them. Antiquities, you can keep on asking them, why did you change? The stone doesn't answer. Stone doesn't give the answer why he has changed. So you try to look at the possibilistic changing forces. Man tries to seek a balance of adaptational strategy with his given ecology. If there are two biologically endowed ecosystem, let us call it the biodiversity of group A and biodiversity of group B. Now, if the biomass is very rich at A, there is no imperative to change. And if the biomass is very scarce in B, there will be rapid change in culture. The traditional method was that if A is changing rapidly and B is not changing at all, then people will say B is less endowed with intelligence. B has missed the bus of civilization, missed the bus, so they're continuing to be in a primitive technology. It is not true. One does not change just for the sake of a fashion. Change comes only when one seeks a adaptational success. Now, if your biodiversity is so rich, then you do not have to change. So you find a group of people may not have changed faster, and you immediately know it is because they had a very rich biodiversity. And if there is a very fast change and rapid change at another place, then you will say it had very rare biodiversity, and they're constantly trying to adapt to a larger amount of biomass by way of increasing their technology. Classic example is European prehistory with South Asian prehistory. In South Asian prehistory, Acheulean continues till the end of Pleistocene. There is no change of Acheulean. And you find in Europe Acheulean changing to Middle Paleolithic, Mousterian, then changing to whole lot of Upper Paleolithic of Aurignacian, Solutrean and Magdalenian. So change is continuous in Europe because the biodiversity is very rare in a temperate ecosystem. Having said as much, we'll try to reconstruct the cause of change in one region on the basis of, let us say, demography. Now, there can be one place where there is a very lack of demographic change. When there is lack of demographic change, you enter into the domain of parasitology. In parasitic infestation in estuary region, in lowland region is such that there is large amount of child mortality. And when there is large amount of child mortality, the population is not increasing. When the population is not increasing, the biodiversity is rich, then also there will be no change in culture because they don't have large number of mouths to feed. So development of culture at two archaeological sites are not to be looked at merely in terms of taxons, but you have to overreach areas of parasitology, overreach the area of paleodemography, and overreach to the area of paleoecology. So all these considerations can alone give you the answer of the cause of change and the rate of change of archaeology from place A to place B. Having said as much, we'll try to look at the varieties of cultural changes that occur in various places. It's a very complex area. I mean, unlike human biological evolution, where you can talk about a continuous change in behavior, a continuous change in taxons, you cannot talk about continuous change in archaeological taxons or archaeological technological attributes. And therefore, an archaeological interpretation is not only dependent on mere creating of taxonomies, but trying to create taxonomies in macro and micro regional analysis. When you have a micro regional analysis, you can have a regional character like I talked of Mikokian in South France. But when you try to generalize Mikokian on the grand scale of macro analysis, then you have to talk about Lower Paleolithic as general stage of development of human culture of the whole globe, of the whole world. Now, this is a kind of a scenario which makes an archaeological exercise extremely exciting. A macro region is something which tells us the given format, like in chemistry, your periodic table. It's a given format. But you discover a new metal, then you have to decide where do you put the new metal according to its atomic number or its nucleus and so on. The same thing happens in regional archaeology and macroarchaeology. I am sorry to say that most of the archaeology being done in the third world country has not been able to develop a regional character so far. We are glowing evidences of South Asia having entirely regional development, but we cannot get out of the regional macro analysis and say this is Mesolithic, this is Paleolithic. For all you know, in India, there may have been no Mesolithic at all. So why borrow that term? Because they had a Mesolithic in Eurocentric analysis. So it's a very interesting scenario where we are standing on the threshold of a period where new scholars like you will develop a regional analysis, a regional character. And we talk of regional character in South Asia. You know that we have 8 ecozones in India today, and in Paleolithic period there may have been more. And all these ecozones have full right to develop their regional characters. And I'm sure a new generation of archaeologists will try to develop new terminologies for regional analysis rather than borrowing the macro terminologies, the global terminologies, lock, stock, and barrel. Thank you.